morning, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Looking around, obviously, there appears to be a lack of a quorum. Florida Statute 373.079 sub 7 states that the governing board shall meet at least once a month. That said, I would like to continue with the parts of our agenda that do not require board action. Those parts will include employee recognitions, the Big Cypress Basin Board Report, the Audit and Finance Committee Report, technical reports, and staff reports. Also, recognizing that this was a noticed agenda, and members of the public have traveled to make comments related to the agenda, I would like to provide an opportunity for the public to speak. That is obviously, after all, one of the hallmarks of the opportunities afforded by this forum. Before we move on with my plan for today's meeting, I'd like to recognize Carlin Kowalski to provide. Right, we're gonna get to the pledge right after this. Yeah, there is order to this agenda, folks. I can promise you that. I'd like to recognize Carlin Kowalski to provide any legal requirements of conducting today's meeting, so that we are all very clear as to scope, purpose, and procedure. Carlin.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mr. Marks asked me to look through the agenda and identify if there were any legal deadlines associated with the items on the agenda. And so I've done that, and there's a handful of things that I'll point out. The first is that there's a couple of items on the consent agenda related to the South Florida Environmental Report. That is the 5-year capital improvement plan and the Florida Forever Work Plan. Those items are things that we have to provide to the department, the governor, the House, and the Senate by March 1st each year. So they do, however, they do not require governing board action. We usually, just as a habit, we always bring those to the board for information before we transmit them to Tallahassee. So we're going to go ahead and transmit those to Tallahassee by the deadline without the board taking that up. Next two things are, there's a couple of construction contracts on the discussion agenda. For those items, we had put in our solicitation that the bidders must hold their price for 120 days. So that means the board can take up those items at its next meeting. And we'll have the same prices. The next item is the Kissimmee Restoration Land Acquisition. That item involved a settlement agreement with the landowners, and we had agreed in that document that we would bring it to the February governing board meeting, and that we would then file the condemnation actions within 30 days after that. However, the landowners have agreed that they're okay if we go ahead and just bring that to the next board meeting. They're not going to object to that. And then finally, there is a requirement in the law that we provide a monthly financial statement to the board meeting each month, and so we will be doing that in the staff reports.
Excellent. Thank you very much, and thank you for clarifying the legal requirements that we are here to satisfy today, in part. At this point in time, Sam, since you obviously brought up a very good point, I want to ask you to please lead us in the pledge. Thank you, Sam. Moving on, in our abbreviated agenda, I'd like to call on Ernie Marks for the employee recognitions, and I'd like to ask my board members to join me in front of the dais.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, board members. As our first order of business, I'd like to introduce our Employee of the Month, Miss Kathy Hunnert, Staff Environmental Scientist, Water Resources Division. As part of Kathy's wide-ranging duties in the coastal ecosystem section, she continuously goes above and beyond on 2 recurring assignments. That's preparing ecological conditions information for the Northern Estuaries for weekly operations meetings with the Corps, and coordinating and reviewing the Applied Sciences Bureau information that goes into Terry's monthly ecological conditions update to the governing board. Kathy's passion for the district's coastal estuaries is evident in her meticulous review and compilation of data. She summarizes extensive data sets from the district's DB Hydro database and compiles summary information in tables and graphics that readily depict current conditions as well as recent trends. She has a keen eye for suspect data and is quick to resolve all data issues. Kathy works with our scientists who employ a multitude of scientific disciplines to characterize environmental conditions in the district's lakes, rivers, wetlands, and estuaries. She works diligently to ensure that the highly technical information provided is presented in a concise fashion and that allows clear understanding across audiences represented at the governing board meetings. In summary, Kathy continues to go the extra mile to ensure that data used to characterize environmental conditions is of the highest quality. Congratulations, Kathy, and thank you for your service. Next is our team of the month, Laboratory Information Management System Implementation. That's a mouthful. The team is representing the Water Resources Division and Information Technology. The members are Mr. Ben Bolin, Keith Herring, Allison Moorman, Joel Nichols, Sharmina Parveen, Yvette Rosher, Sharon Smith, Javier Gonzalez Saldana, Michael Tompkins, Richard Walker, and Jay Zen. This team, led by the Analytical Services Section in the Water Quality Bureau, completed an 8-month-long project to perform a major upgrade to the district's Environmental Laboratory Information Management System. Known as LIMS, the upgrade, entitled Moving from the Oracle Forms-Based LIMS, or version 11 client, to a fully supported web-based system. Staff installed, configured, and tested version 12, which included many extra working hours, nights, and weekends, and intensive vendor coordination. This upgrade was a strategic priority, allowing for full adoption of the latest operating systems and greater compatibility with district IT standards. Working closely with IT and the LIMS vendor, the team completed the extensive training to conduct comprehensive configuration of the version for testing in the laboratory. The overall effort also involved coordination with field collectors and data stewards and users. The upgraded LIMS was kicked off in April 2018 and is now live. All this and laboratory operations continue to meet the needs of the district data users without missing a beat. Congratulations to the team. Thank you all. Thank you. Next is our service award, 25 years. Mr. William Eric Gens, Lead Structural Engineer, Operations and Engineering Division. Eric was hired as an engineer in the design section in February 1994 from the State Department, where he worked on embassy renovations. He had previously worked 10 years at the Corps of Engineers in Norfolk and Jacksonville, as well as various private consultants. Eric earned a civil engineering's bachelor degree from Virginia Tech and a master's degree from the University of Virginia. As a district engineer in the design section, Eric has quite a legacy for designing several firsts. He did the first tailwater weir at the S68. He did the first pump station hurricane hardening at the S6, and the first trash rake system placed upstream of the S13 pump station. Eric also designed the structural elements of the Emergency Operations Center, among numerous other projects. He transferred to the Infrastructure Management section in 2000, where his specialty areas include bridges and crane loads. Today, he is a lead inspector for the Structure Inspection Program. Born on Friday the 13th, he is a Halloween enthusiast and likes long walks on the beach. He is also known for his humor and knowledge of sports trivia. His colleagues say they are honored to have Eric as a coworker and look forward to his remaining 2 short years left before his retirement. Thank you, Eric, for your years of service and tremendous contributions. Where are the Florida State jerseys? Oh, okay, good. There we go.
Son was born on Halloween.
Oh, hey, that's what I was doing. Okay, before y'all sit down, I did want to just bring your attention to the 2 photographs that we have on the left side of the auditorium. If you didn't notice them when we came in, I'd like to do a shout out for 2 more employees. The ones responsible for these large photos on the wall to our left, Chen and Brent. If you're here today, please stand. Chen Chi took the photo of the blue herring. Chen is a senior engineer in the Hydrology and Hydraulics Bureau. And Brent Anderson took the photo of the cypress trees. Brent is an environmental scientist in the Applied Sciences Bureau. Thanks to both of you for these incredible photos to be enjoyed for so many more years to come. Thank you. And that concludes our recognitions.
Okay, thank you very much, Ernie, and thank you to all of our fantastic employees that really are the source of the success of this agency, which has always been so very impressive and so absolutely important to the well-being of all of our stakeholders throughout the 16 counties that we serve. At this point in time, I'd like to move on to the Big Cypress Basin Board Report, and I'd like to call Lisa Keeler, our Basin Administrator for BCB, to provide that. Welcome, Lisa.
Good morning. How are you today?
Very well,
Thank you for letting me be here. We had a very short agenda at our January board meeting. Karen Estock, our field station superintendent, gave us a proposal for some right-of-way waivers. One was for a 40-foot rule, waiving that, and that's because in the basin we don't have 40 feet of right-of-way on our canals. And the other was a waiver for a pedestrian bridge that is proposed to match the existing roadway bridge that will go against. We had no objections. The Basin Board then directed staff to move that forward in the process, so that'll be before the governing board for final consideration at the March meeting. We had an overview from Lucine Dadrian on our basin capital projects. And then lastly, we had an overview from Ms. Heater on our basin budget and the time frame going forward. And that concluded our meeting. Any questions?
Thank you very much. Do we have any board questions at this time?
Thank you.
Oh, ma'am. Well, thank you. Okay, moving on to governing board committee reports, audit and finance. I'd like to call Candida Heater, our acting administrative service director for audit and finance, to provide the report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, board members. We had our Audit and Finance Committee meeting on January 10th here in West Palm Beach. Ms. Lucy Weinberg, our district treasurer, provided an update on the investment portfolio. As of November 30th, Ms. Weinberg stated rates continued to move favorably, and the district took advantage of this by laddering investments. Mr. Edwards, managing director of Raymond James, also provided a historical overview of the district's investment portfolio and the benefits of increasing the maximum investment percentage amount of mortgage-backed securities from the current policy of 30% to 50%. Next, Inspector General Tim Bearns presented the findings from the audit of the Kissimmee River Restoration Project cost share for land acquisition expenditures. The next Audit and Finance Committee meeting is scheduled for April 11th in West Palm Beach, and that concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Do we have any board questions or comments at this time for the report? Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, at this point in time, we're going to move along to our technical reports included on the discussion agenda. I'd like to call John Mitnick to provide our water conditions report.
All right. Morning, everyone. So as usual, I'm going to quickly run through the current water conditions throughout the Central and Southern Florida Flood Control Project. Looking back at the month of January right here, you can see for the first time in a long time, we had an excess of rainfall. In fact, we had roughly 2.3 inches of excess rainfall. December, there was just a little smidgen of excess rainfall, so I wouldn't really count that, so to speak. But in looking at January, it all came in a rush roughly the last week of January, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the upcoming slides. So far for the month of February, as you can see, the month of February had been relatively little rainfall, but then just this week, we got a front that came down the peninsula that brought a significant amount of rain to South Florida, and I'll describe that a little bit further also. So as I said, looking at the month of January, overall, it wound up roughly 4.2 inches of rain. That's some 200% above average rainfall, or above the amount of rain that you typically expect during the month of January. Most of those rains were centered over the middle section of the district through here. As you can see, there was roughly 5 inches of rain that fell south of Lake Okeechobee, 4.5 or just above 4.5, in parts of the Caloosahatchee, and just under 4.5 over here towards the west coast. Lake Okeechobee itself received just under 4 inches of direct rainfall on the lake. So looking back at those last 30 days, you can see the majority of the rain right here fell at the end of January. That was roughly the last week of January, January 26, 7, and 8. It brought all of that rain. Looking at the district as a whole and the individual basins, you can see the majority of the district received that 5 inches of rainfall, but there are some areas here in orange that got between 6 and 8 inches of rainfall. One little spot right over here on the east coast that got between 8 and 10 inches of rainfall. Looking back just earlier this week, for those rains that came across the state on Tuesday night into Wednesday, roughly a 1 inch district-wide just in that 24 to 36 hour period that fell across the state. And you can see it was pretty widespread throughout the district. The yellows in there are 1.5 inches to 2 inches of rain. They extended some up in the Kissimmee River Valley over on the west coast, and then down in the southern portions of Miami-Dade County. The east coast itself, after having received some of those heavier rains in January, so far for the month of February, those heavier rains just kind of fell offshore right along here. So looking at the dry season to date, up until that rain in the end of January, the dry season to date had been actually below average rainfall, but just that one rain event over, like I said, January 26, 7, and 8 brought the district as a whole above average rainfall for the dry season to date. So we're roughly sitting at 130% of average rainfall so far. So as you would expect, with those rains that came down the peninsula, all the lakes in the upper chain rose there just before January and into January. You'll note that this is the time of the year and why you see the lake levels starting to decline in all three lakes, here, here, and here. This is the time of year where those lakes start to get drawn down in order to meet their bottom of their summer pool down here by June 1st. So that water is transitioning down through the Kissimmee River right now, moving water from East Lake Toho into Toho, and then from there into Lake Kissimmee and on down the river. We're moving about 3,600 cubic feet per second down the river right now. And of course, as we have in the past couple years, we'll have to balance that with the ongoing restoration efforts that the Corps of Engineers is undertaking with some of their construction activity along the river itself. So we're in coordination with the Corps as to what their construction needs are and what the respective flood control needs of the upper chain of lakes may be. So looking down at Lake Okeechobee, as of Monday of this week, the lake stage was sitting at 12.69. With the rains that occurred, that 4 inches that occurred the past couple days, the lake has probably gone up since then, so I would reasonably expect the lake stage to be somewhere around 12.75 today, just from those rains that occurred in the Tuesday and Wednesday of this week. Overall, in the last 30 days, the lake stage has increased by 1/4 foot, but that's a little deceptive because the first half of January was very dry, so the lake had receded down to about 12.2 feet, and then the rains towards the end of January actually drove it up 1/2 foot up into the 12.6, 12.7 range. But if you just look over the entire 30 days, that's why it only reflects roughly 1/4 foot. The Corps of Engineers is continuing to utilize their additional operational flexibility to lower the water levels this season to the extent possible and being consistent with LORS 2008 and the National Environmental Policy Act document that was promulgated with LORS 2008. So looking at the lake stage, you can see 2018 left off over here, picking up at 2019. This is what I was talking about. The lake had been receding down through the month of January until those rains at the end of January, and it brought the lake up roughly 1/2 foot. The lake stage had sort of stabilized and was starting to trend back down again until we received the rains just this week, which probably caused it to stabilize, if not slightly increase. So looking forward in time for a projection analysis, again, there's that bump from the end of January in those rains, so starting at the beginning of February, what we can reasonably anticipate based on the past 41 years of historical records of four-lake stage tend to focus on this 50% line, so it's the 50% probability that lake stages will be at or below that line at any given point in time into the future. If you want to bound it, you kind of look between the 75 percentile range here and the 25th percentile down here, and that's roughly where you can reasonably expect the lake to be into the future. Just jumping back a month, at the beginning of January when I was standing before the governing board, this was the lake stage, and you can see how it receded. At that point in time, we were trending along the 25th percentile projection from January 1st. Had that have continued, what we were showing back in January is that you would have seen that 25th percentile line cross into the water shortage management band here in April and May. However, with those rains that occurred at the end of January, you can see that probability has shifted out farther into the future, and it may not be until June timeframe that the projection is showing it dipping into the water shortage management band, just based on averaging all of the 41-year period of record. If you look at just a subset of the El Nino years, and again, this year is characterized as a relatively weak El Nino phenomenon, So looking at past El Nino years, you can see what years those are over here on the right-hand side. This would be the projection of lake stages if we were to receive rainfall commensurate with rains that occurred during those El Nino years from the period of record. So looking at the southern portion of the system, a similar story. Looking at Conservation Area 1, stages increased dramatically as a result of the direct rainfalls from the end of January and earlier this week. We are and have been continuing to move Lake Okeechobee water down through the stormwater treatment areas and deliver it to Conservation Area 1. So that's part of this increase in stage here as well. Looking at Area 2, you can obviously see the dramatic rise in stages in the conservation area. The Corps of Engineers began implementing releases from Area 2 down into Area 3. They're currently moving water to the tune of about 1,700 cubic feet per second, moving that water down into Area 3. I've forgotten to mention they are also moving at about 500 cubic feet per second from Area 1 down into Area 2 as Area 1 starts getting closer to its regulatory line up here. So with those flows coming in from Area 2, as well as the direct rainfall, you can see the increases in stages here associated with Conservation Area 3. This is from the January rains. Then you see a very small uptick from the rains just earlier this week. In addition to moving that Lake Okeechobee water into Area 1, we're also moving water from Lake Okeechobee down through the stormwater treatment areas into Area 2 and into Area 3. For Area 3, we're predominantly trying to deliver that water over, if the cursor would cooperate, over here into the northwest corner of Conservation Area 3, as well as the northeast corner of Area 3 right in here through a gravity structure next to the S7 pump station. Looking at the bottom end of Conservation Area 3, this week was actually the first week in a while that the rainfall plan kicked in. And so let me describe a little bit what the rainfall plan is. It's essentially a mathematical formula that dictates or prescribes when to move water from Area 3 down into Everglades National Park. There are two components of it. There's the regulatory component, which is associated with the regulation schedule. So anytime lake stages cross this purple dotted line, then there's a certain volume of water that you need to move out of Conservation Area 3 down to the south into Everglades National Park based on the height above that line. The second component is exactly what the name describes, the rainfall formula. So if, looking back through history, the park reasonably expected these kinds of flows with this given rainfall. So the rainfall formula is kicked in for the first time in a long time, and it is prescribing just short of 200 cubic feet per second to be moved from Conservation Area 3 down into the park. So we've been doing that as of this week, moving water not through the S12s, but rather through the 333 structure located right here along the L29 canal, because that structure has enough capacity to move all 200 of that rainfall formula requirement. So we're moving that water into the L29. It's flowing underneath the newly constructed bridges and into Northeast Shark River Slough. In addition to that, we had been moving about 250 CFS through the L20, or rather through the 333 structure, across the L29 canal, around the corner through the 334 structure, and delivering it down the South Dade conveyance system. That operation is so as to accomplish two things. One, to continue to keep the detention areas along this region hydrated as we go deeper and deeper into the dry season, as well as to be able to deliver water to the headwaters of Taylor Slough down here through the Florida Bay project. That operation was curtailed earlier this week, again associated with the rainfall that occurred Tuesday and Wednesday. So we're being mindful of maintaining flood control along here, and there was enough water to keep those operations of the pump stations along the South Dade conveyance system in operation, moving that water into the detention cells. And once those levels are brought back under control, then we'll once again resume moving the 250 CFS down towards the headwaters of Taylor Slough. But in the meantime, as I said, we're continuing to use that rainfall to maintain those operations and deliver water to the headwaters of Taylor Slough over here. Going a little bit further down, we've increased the flows down towards the panhandle down here. However, we are not operating nor opening S-197 down here at the bottom end of the canal system, as there's really no need to, and the flows, overland flows out through the panhandle are more than sufficient to be able to keep up with the rains that we've had. So looking back at January, this is what the U.S. Drought Monitor looked like, and if I fast forward to the beginning of February, you can see those areas have decreased. This graphic is representative of only February 5th, so it does not take into account the rains earlier this week. More than likely, with those rains just Tuesday and Wednesday of this week, I would assume that the majority of this yellow and brown have pretty much disappeared off the peninsula of Florida. As to what the future may hold, the Climate Prediction Center is still calling for above average rainfall through April associated with that El Nino condition, and then beyond June through August, equal chances of having either normal, below normal, or above normal rainfall. As usual, what I can tell you for the next 5 days, district meteorologists are not predicting any significant rains throughout the district. However, some of the models are forecasting some significant rains in the 7 to 10 day forecast. So out past the end of next week, we'll be watching what that system brings, if it develops at all. And the reason why I say that, the rains that just came this week, if we were to go back 14 days, they weren't appearing in the models anywhere, and they just kind of sprung up. So as you get past that 5 to 7 day window, things get a little bit more sketchy. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Do we have any board questions? Sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John, thank you for that outstanding report. I always look forward to your water conditions reports, and certainly your El Nino forecast, or the forecast that you had been providing us since last August, all kind of came to fruition on the 27th and 28th of January. Welcome to Florida, ladies and gentlemen. It just, you get all your rain in 2 days. And as you were talking about, John, that, the water that we're holding up in the northern chain of lakes, it hasn't made its way down to Lake Okeechobee. We got a little bit more rain here in the last couple of days. So that 12.7 number, probably once that water on the north starts flowing south, we're probably at a 13.2 to 13.5 reality of Lake O at this point. Would you agree with that?
If you just do the simple math, let me back up here. So as I said, all of these lakes have got to get down to the bottom of their schedules by June 1st. If you just take their current stages today and look at what that stage is on June 1st, and you calculate the volume of the lake, there's roughly somewhere in the neighborhood of 180,000 acre feet of water that would be transitioned down, and then factor in any additional future rains and evaporation. It could represent about 3 to 4/10 of a foot on Lake Okeechobee.
Okay. So in saying that, the hot topic of conversation these days is the new LOSM, or what we know as LORS still today, in this conversation of lowering Lake Okeechobee in the dry season unnaturally to 10.6 feet by the end of May. So we would have to have, based upon what I'm seeing here, a 3-foot intentional drop in Lake Okeechobee over about the next 90-day period of time. So if what I'm saying there is correct, John, would you agree that it would be very likely that the St. Lucie Estuary needs to start receiving freshwater discharges from Lake O today?
I would go back to having what the Corps is intending to do. The Corps is looking at utilizing that operational flexibility in the schedule to be able to manage the stages in Lake Okeechobee down through the beneficial use band. I do not believe they have a specific target that they are driving towards, but responsibly managing Lake Okeechobee to bring those water levels down.
Mr. Chair, if I may add, I have noticed Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds is here today, so maybe if there's more LOSOM questions, that may be better to bring her up, just as a suggestion.
Yeah, John, I appreciate the answer, and I'll just give my perspective on this. I think that a 3-foot intentional drop of Lake Okeechobee over the next 90 days, I'm going to have to let my father, who lives on the South Fork of the St. Lucie River, and my friends that are on the South Fork of the St. Lucie River, and let them know that that salinity that exists there today and our oyster beds and all of those things that we're trying to recover are now going to be flushed out with fresh water, because we're going to have to send a massive amount of water out the East Coast, out through the estuary to start getting that lake down to 10.6 over the next 90 days, if that were the target, if that's where it ended up, because we certainly can't send any additional more water to the south for a variety of reasons. We're sending, I believe, 1,000 CFS pulse releases to the Caloosahatchee, and the Lieutenant Colonel could answer that if she wants, but based on what I've seen, you can't send a tremendous amount of new water to the West Coast beyond that here during the dry season. So I believe that would be incredibly detrimental to my estuary to see those conditions exist if we were intentionally trying to drop that lake 3 feet over the next 90 days. So John, thank you for your answer. I appreciate that very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Ms. Moran?
Well, I don't have any questions. I just want to agree with Tucker's comments and remind everybody that of the reasons why we can't move much more water south, not to mention that the system's almost full, but because of the constraints we have, which were noted a couple years ago in the report I call the Kivett report. And I noticed that our friend Jeff Kivett is here with us today, and I want to say hi to Jeff and thank him for the work he did on that, and recommend to our staff that when the new administration comes in here, the new board, that they all get a copy of the Kivett report so that they'll know what's what. Thank you.
Thank you. Sam, do you have anything to say? Okay. Thank you, John. I appreciate the information. Right. Moving on to our ecological conditions report, I'd like to call Terry Bates for that report.
You're going to have to keep the mouse pushed up, keep that up there on that screen.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. I'll start our report as we do at the northern end of the system with the Kissimmee, and you can see the difference that a month makes. Last month in January, with that lack of rainfall, there were pretty much very dry conditions across the entire floodplain, and barely making kind of minimum discharges through the Kissimmee at 262 CFS, and we're more than 10 times that right now with all the rainfall that occurred. So the floodplain has become well inundated. This gives you a sense, this is in the Phase 1 restoration area, so really flooding across the entire floodplain. And this is in the Phase 2 restoration area. These are some of the pasture areas just near the S65C structure, which was recently removed. First time we've had significant flooding in these areas in about 40 years. So starting to see a lot of water through this. The issue is we're not applying the appropriate hydrology right now. The project isn't finished, so it tends to be very flashy. You get a lot of rain, and then that water comes down. But good to see water across the areas we anticipated with restoration. Lake Okeechobee, again, difference from a year ago. We're about 2.5 feet lower this time of year than we were in 2018. You can see still dry conditions across, oops, you're right, the mouse is pumping around. This portion of the littoral zone and still this portion of the marsh where we've done a lot of restoration work was the site of a lot of wading bird activity, a lot of foraging activity. And with the lake having been so high for so long, from an ecological standpoint, that's beneficial to try and recover some of the submerged aquatic vegetation that had been really substantially impacted over the last few years with the hurricane and high water conditions. So these are the wading bird surveys that we've seen. Gosh, why is this bouncing around? You get very, very high wading bird foraging activity in this part of the marsh. The area that's in red is really too dry for much activity. And you can see here in January some of the highest foraging activities that we've seen on the lake. So that's a good thing. But with the lake at the condition it is and with the recent rise, we don't expect a lot of wading bird nesting activity, and that's true throughout the Everglades as well. You know, we had a banner nesting activity last year, so it's not necessarily unusual that in the subsequent year conditions are different, we might have a much lower kind of nesting activity. But with a rise in water levels across this portion of the lake, we've dispersed the prey species, so I expect next month this activity will be substantially reduced. No, it's not going to. Lake Okeechobee water quality, we've been tracking kind of the significant impacts that we saw from Hurricane Irma, both with turbidity as well as increased phosphorus levels. And the notable thing that we reported on was after the hurricane, actually it was a few months later that we really saw the spike, and that's when you had a lot of wind action on the lake, which is typically what happens in January, February. You get those cold fronts that come across, and you can see a little bit of this has occurred as well in this January and February. So the yellow lines here are the pelagic zone, this open water portion of the lake. Those sediments stirred up a bit, phosphorus levels up a bit, but still substantially lower than what we experienced after the hurricane. Not seeing a lot of indication, as we would expect, of cyanobacteria across the lake. Again, this is a image that we've been tracking since the significant impacts back in July. And with the cooler temperatures and shorter days, there's not a lot of algae activity that you see across the lake, so that's good news. In the St. Lucie Estuary, no discharges occurring. Back since October, you can see the rainfall that John mentioned here in February really kind of spiked discharges to the estuary for a short period of time, and that's just from the basin runoff, the tidal basins coming into the estuary, no discharges coming in from the lake. Here's the change from January to February in salinity levels coming across, where we had a nice salinity gradient out to the inlet, and you can see the effect of the rainfall still maintaining a good salinity gradient throughout the system with those discharges having subsided. And the effect on salinity in the areas that we track for oysters still within the good range. This is not the time of year that we expect a lot of oyster activity or oyster recruitment, but we had seen at the end of last fall some good signs of recovery in the estuary, and that's something that we hope to continue to see throughout this system in the spring. On the Caloosahatchee Estuary, the kind of spike pattern you see here, you're familiar with the pulse releases that the Corps has been making from Lake Okeechobee to maintain the salinity gradient throughout the Caloosahatchee Estuary. The releases from Lake Okeechobee stopped here when we had significant inflow from the watershed. Again, that's a 500,000 acre watershed that had a lot of rainfall on it, discharged quite a bit to the Caloosahatchee, and then the releases resumed from the lake last week. So here's the change in the salinity pattern from January. Again, a nice setup from freshwater conditions to greater saline and then out to more marine conditions towards Sanibel. And you can see it's been pushed. I'm sorry, this mouse is just bouncing around on me here. You can see the freshwater conditions pushed further downstream. Looked at the hydrographs this morning, or the water information. It looks like discharges right now, it is 79, are about 2,800 CFS. There's no water coming in from Lake Okeechobee, but that significant rainfall that occurred has really bumped up the discharges going to the Caloosahatchee right now as a result of that inflows from the watershed. And you can see the effect here on salinity levels where we track on the oyster beds. Again, not a lot of spatting activity happening now. That peak really picks up in the April timeframe, and that's going to be much more of a concern. But those higher inflows coming into the estuary certainly can have an effect with increasing turbidity and reducing the light penetration that we're hoping to see recovery in the upper estuary of some of the seagrass community, tapegrass communities that are underway there. As we look at the push, certainly we've been underway to move water where we can in the system and move water south. I always share with the board the conditions of the stormwater treatment areas, and we are seeing some recovery from where we were with Hurricane Irma. Last year was our worst performance in many, many years because of this tremendous volumes that the SDAs treated. 1.7 million acre feet of water came through the SDAs. This year we're almost at 1.4 million acre feet, so the SDAs continue to treat very high volumes of water coming through. And I'll just note for you, from releases coming from Lake Okeechobee as opposed from the basin, we're almost 350,000 acre feet so far this year of water that's been moved from the lake into the STAs. That's the second highest volume of lake water that's been treated in the STAs to date. And just as a frame of reference, the assumptions that we had in restoration strategies and the design of those STAs to treat the basin water was about 58,000 acre feet. So this is a concern from the science standpoint of how we're pushing water through the STAs. STA 3-4 continues to perform very well, but we are pushing it very hard. Almost half of the discharges that have gone south, both from the basin and from lake water, are going through STA 3-4. And we're starting to see some of the consequences of that. This is one of the things that our scientific staff gets together every week, just like we do the rest of the system. We have a special meeting of our STA scientists with our water managers, continually evaluating cell by cell in the STAs of what can they take, what can they handle, as we look for opportunities to move water. So this picture is STA 3-4, and one of the things you can see up here is these open water areas near the inflow, which would normally be vegetated, and some of what we would call short-circuiting as water is coming through the STA in open water and a lot of stressed areas of cattail. So that's a concern for us, and again, that's something we evaluate every single week of where do we think water can move in the system. Currently, with the rainfall that we've gotten from the basin and from the lake discharges, the STA is a little higher than we would want to see this time of year, so that's something we will continue to evaluate on a week-to-week basis. As we move further south in the system, the rainfall helped. We were starting to see really what we would expect as far as seasonal salinities being elevated in the nearshore areas that we monitor in Biscayne Bay, just because there simply was no rainfall for the last few months. But with the recent rainfalls, those salinities have returned to a more favorable condition. And then, as John mentioned, significant change in the Everglades system in the conservation areas, where last month you see a lot of the orange and yellow. Those were the dry conditions in Conservation Area 1 and across Conservation Area 3A. And this month you can see much, much wetter conditions. So that significant reversal, that increase in stage, would potentially cause a lot of concern if we had significant wading bird nesting activity going on. But because the conditions had been so dry for months, the birds really hadn't had that trigger to get started with nesting, so there was not a lot of nesting activity going on, so we don't expect significant impacts as a result of that reversal in the system at this point in time. Down in northeast Florida Bay, where we measure the MFL, again, the declining water levels, we see flows have been reduced over the last few months because of the lack of rainfall. Salinity levels still staying very fresh along this nearshore condition, so that's favorable. And as we continue to operate the Florida Bay project, continuing to send small amounts of water into Upper Taylor Slough. And you can see this is pictures actually back from April, but you can see the detention area in the background and where that water flow is coming across the system. Here's Everglades Park Road. One of the concerns as that project was initiated, took quite a lot of dialogue, because one of the concerns of putting more water more directly into Taylor Slough to get it to Florida Bay was that concern of concentration versus low of nutrients. We have very ultra low concentration of phosphorus on the order of 5 or 6. But if you start sending a lot more water through the system, that's going to increase the nutrient load coming in. So that was a lot of concern to everyone. And one of the things that we put in place was a very robust monitoring plan. You can see in this graphic on the right, all of those stations in yellow are new monitoring stations that we implemented so that we could collect the data to be able to determine, are we seeing impacts? We've got a lot of engagement from the scientific community in the park and with our staff, from NOAA, from USGS. And so our preliminary data, we've only, this is a fairly recent project, we've only had 1 year of data. Not seeing any ecological impacts or degradation from that, but we'll continue to certainly monitor this system very closely. And each year we've got a meeting with all the scientists to get together and review the data, see how that project is operating. In western and central Florida Bay, this is an area I don't typically report on. This is an area that's really outside kind of the influence of our day-to-day water management operations. It certainly is very directly affected by rainfall conditions, but this is the area where we saw significant seagrass die-off. And you can see on the graphs here that back in 2015, the spikes of very high salinity levels that were experienced in this area. They've been fairly stable over the last few months, so not concerned about that. A little higher than we would expect this time of year, just because we've not had any rainfall coming in. One positive thing that I will leave you with to close out here is seeing some recovery of the spotted sea trout, which is a really important game fish in this area in western and central Florida Bay. And this is data that's being reported. It's still in draft form, but that NOAA has collected. They primarily do the fisheries work in this area. And you can see the graphics here where we had significant decline of that very important game fish, and in the last 2 years, starting to see some recovery. Although, to be fair, I've got to point out, the researchers note that's not because of particular water management activities. Again, this is an area that's most directly affected by rainfall and what's coming through the system. But it's encouraging that we're starting to see some signs of recovery in that portion of the system. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Can you tell me exactly where those spotted trout are, by any chance?
Right here.
Right there?
Yeah, see these
Okay.
little dots right here?
Pushing more water through the conservation areas, have we seen a spike in nutrient levels at Tamiami Trail?
We've not. I haven't seen, we're still within the range that we would expect. The system is just now starting to fill up from that rainfall, so we'll see that data coming in. But
Can we take it, and how often do we sample that, the
Every-
nutrient levels at that site?
along there, we've got every 2 weeks that data is collected.
So why can't we take that water to the maximum we can send through it until we see a spike or the nutrient levels start? Can we shut it off as quickly?
It's not the water quality that drives our operations, it's the engineering and structural components. The water quality data comes in afterwards, and then we evaluate, but we don't make the decisions on moving water here or there because of an instantaneous water quality reading. It's really the operations of the system.
So it's not an issue of quality, it's quantity?
In the, I don't want to say constraints, but the structural capacity that we're able to operate the system
Because
at.
in my area, that rain yesterday, the 2 inches we had in a matter of 30 minutes, put water over our beds immediately. Because, as I've been saying in these meetings, we've been washing our hands in the wells. You know, we can bend over, reach down and touch the water. This is property that's been farmed for 65, 70 years. We have tons of water sitting right at Taylor Slough. And it still buffaloes me. You know, I'm farming lands that are 3 miles from the slough. It buffaloes me how I am frequently flooding with a very common Florida rain, 2 inches. And we don't have our 8 pumps screaming west to get rid of this water, because I believe the pumps can shut off as quickly as we crank them. And, you know, this whole project is to send more water into Everglades National Park, into Taylor Slough, and it's sitting below my feet in a lot of occasions. It's really mind-boggling how we can allow non-stakeholders to decide what's happening to my bay, my Everglades, and my farmland. So it's just very concerning. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions or comments for Terry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Terry, back on slide 15, and you showed the flows through the STAs, and you talked about the restoration strategies capacity at 58,300, and we got 348,000 acre feet flowing through. So I would assume that there's a critical mass point to where, and you said you were concerned that if we continue to inundate these STAs, we're going to lose them. Certainly, if we started sending more new water, I would assume that would be an even bigger problem. Could you talk about that a little bit, where you feel like we are as far as critical mass when it comes to the STAs?
Sure. It's difficult to say because you're dealing with a living biological system. You don't know what that magic point is that when you hit this, you've gone too far, which is why it's something that's evaluated every single week of where to put water. As we look to move water south, the direction we have is the maximum practical. And one of those constraints of moving water south is having it treated through the STAs. So we continually look to see where can we do that. We have cells that are highly stressed. We try and prioritize the discharges so that they're going to a cell that's a little better off while we work on revegetation or rehab, trying to rest those cells, get the water levels down. It's a very dynamic concern, but we know we have the experience back in the hurricanes in 2004, 2005, was it 2006 and 7? Which set, where it was kind of a no holds bar. We said, we're going to push the water through. And we undertook that measure to really just push what we could, hydraulically, what you can push through a system on STA 1 West. And we ended up with a cell that literally went belly up, where the concentrations coming in were lower than were going out. We were discharging on the order of 250 parts per billion. And so we had, a few thousand acres that literally had to come offline, be drained down, and rehab. So we're very cognizant of not pushing them that hard, and that's something that our staff looks at every week. But as, rainfall conditions, we're going to treat the basin water that comes through, coming off of Hurricane Irma last year, and then the rainfalls that we had in May. Again, just kind of 2 years, just like Lake Okeechobee. Very high water for a long period of time is difficult to deal with in a treatment system like that.
Mr. Moran?
Terry, you just said that the direction we have is to move as much water south as what is practical or possible. What did?
Under LORS.
Under LORS.
Where we can send water south. It says to send water to the water conservation areas to the maximum extent practical.
Okay. And let me ask you, I don't know if it's right on point, you may have commented on it earlier, about the situation with these efforts to reduce the lake. Won't that have some kind of effect on the nesting of the birds? Don't they count on a recession of water levels part of the year? How will that affect them?
They do count on that gradual recession, but because the conditions, the hydrologic conditions, they weren't getting the cues to kind of start nesting because they've been so dry for so long, both in the conservation areas and in the lake, that we've not seen a lot of wading bird activity pick up in either of those areas. And so that's not necessarily uncommon after you've had a banner year like this.
Maybe
Yeah.
they were reading the papers.
Well, and then as, with the kind of the worst thing from a nesting activity is when birds start nesting, the thing that's most concerning is if you have a sudden reversal. So a lot of times that's completely out of your control. You get a lot of rainfall event and all of a sudden the water jumps up, it disperses the prey, and then the birds, they will abandon their nest in that circumstance.
Do we have any other questions or comments? Sam? Okay. Oh, short.
The collapse that occurred with pushing that 200,000 acres too hard, it collapsed because of nutrient levels? Is that why it collapsed?
It was a lot of water being moved through, so the depths were deep and the turbidity was very high. We were sending lake water that had been, just like we saw after Hurricane Irma, when the lake was completely churned up. So the phosphorus loads coming in, concentrations coming in, were on the order of 250, 260, where typically the STAs are getting concentrations of maybe 100 coming in. So it was way too much flowing through that system, too deep, and just really led to kind of a mud pit at the end.
Thank you.
I should just add, though, at that time when that happened, we also did not have anywhere near the same STA capacity we have today. We've obviously expanded with Compartment B and C and expanded the STAs that we have in place, so we have more flexibility now than we did at that time to kind of prioritize where we send that water, but we're very cautious on making those decisions.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that clarification. So we have any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Terry. Okay, folks. I want to take an opportunity to kind of shift gears here. The work we perform, that staff perform, the advocacy that presents itself in this building is so very passionate and so very important to the tasks at hand. And it's a rare occasion that from the dais we get to pivot for just a moment and look beyond the scope of flood control and environmental restoration and look at issues affecting our society. But it's absolutely necessary to do so right now. Today represents the anniversary, the one-year anniversary of the Parkland shootings. They occurred a year ago at 10/17, and at that point in time, 17 lives were lost. 14 students, 3 teachers or staff. That definitely gives us all a reason to pause and to recognize the value of human contribution and effort, the love we all have for our communities. We're going through a transitionary period with many hopes. My personal hope is that these positive changes can occur through a unified effort to support and care about the well-being of our communities, our environment, and ultimately about each other. With that being said, I'd like to take a moment to honor the memories of the lives that were touched and lost and affected a year ago today, and I would like to ask Tia to lead us in a 1-minute moment of silence so that we can honor and reflect. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you all. Okay. So before we move on to staff reports, I want to begin by offering the public and those who have passionately advocated time and again for solutions and the work that we perform here to have an opportunity to provide comment. Do we have any comment at this time, Tia?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have quite a few.
Thank you.
Jeremy McBrien, then Joan Lawrence, and Irela Bagay.
Good morning, Jeremy.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Jeremy McBrien, Palm Beach County Water Resources Manager here today, speaking on behalf of Palm Beach County. The draft project implementation report for the Caloosahatchee River Restoration Project that Ava will talk to you briefly about is very important, critical next step for Caloosahatchee River restoration. Palm Beach County encourages the district and the Corps to continue to proceed with planning activities to achieve river restoration and consider expediting activities in the watershed, such as wetland restoration. Many stakeholders in Palm Beach County are impatient, and rightly so, as the Caloosahatchee River has been a priority since 1985, when it was designated a national wild and scenic river, and then authorized in Congress in 2000 as part of SERP. Palm Beach County stakeholders have consistently communicated to the Board of County Commissioners their frustration with the lack of tangible progress by the state and federal agencies and the removal of key project benefits during the planning process. In addition, there are many benefits envisioned in the original SERP plan approved by Congress in 2000 that are not included in the current Caloosahatchee River plan and that will need to be addressed. For example, reducing undesirable discharges to Lake Worth Lagoon. Palm Beach County has been a leader in restoration efforts in the Caloosahatchee River watershed, aggressively acquiring land and restoring wetlands for the benefit of the ecosystem. Several county-owned natural areas totaling almost 28,000 acres of land are within the Caloosahatchee River watershed. County staff have also been engaged in every iteration of the Caloosahatchee River Restoration Project, including its previous incarnation, the North Palm Beach County Project. Palm Beach County believes it is imperative for the district to move forward with repairs to Stormwater Treatment Area 1 East and the construction of a replacement storage feature to capture excess L8 basin runoff, both of which are mandated to be a consent orders issued to the district by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection in 2012, and that will have direct positive impacts on the Lake Worth Lagoon. Palm Beach County looks forward to continued discussions on how best to achieve the benefits outlined in SERP within Palm Beach County and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you for providing that update and for highlighting those points. Welcome, Joan.
Good morning. Joan Lawrence, on behalf of myself, as a resident of Miami-Dade County and a member of its boating community. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the district staff and the governing board, in particular Chairman Fernandez, for continued support of the Biscayne Bay Coastal Wetlands Project. The Corps and the district are going to be moving ahead with a project management plan and a scope of study for Phase 2 of that project. As you all know, the Bay is a huge economic driver for my county, Miami-Dade County, and Biscayne Bay Coastal Wetlands Project Phase 2 is going to contribute to the health of that vital bay. Thank you all so much for your support.
Thank you, Joan. Urilla, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As a former governing board member and now chair of the Resilience Committee at the Greater Miami Chamber of Commerce, I'm here to thank you, in particular, Mr. Chair, for submitting a request to the Army Corps of Engineers to allocate funds for the development of a project management plan and scope of study for Phase 2 of the Biscayne Bay Coastal Wetlands, as Joan announced earlier. As you know, Biscayne Bay is an essential part of Miami-Dade's economy, and a large part of our prosperity comes from real estate, trade, tourism, fishing, all of which depend on a healthy bay ecosystem, and agriculture too. In recent years, Biscayne Bay has been experiencing hypersalinity, seagrass die-off, coral reef disease, periods of alga blooms, and red tide, and also recurring sewage spills from our aging water infrastructure. These are all obvious indicators that the bay is now in a serious ecological decline. So the Board of County Commissioners of Miami-Dade County recently created a Biscayne Bay Task Force, which will be made of experts and key stakeholders that will take a holistic approach to our bay's challenges and prioritize actions to create a long-term path for our bay's recovery. Sustaining the momentum of the Biscayne Bay Coastal Wetlands Project is essential to achieving restoration goals for Biscayne Bay and the health of Biscayne National Park. On behalf of all Biscayne Bay stakeholders in Miami-Dade County, we look forward to continuing our work with the South Florida Water Management District and the Army Corps of Engineers to help move all of the SERP projects to completion, which is the only way to truly alleviate and help provide relief to all the estuaries in the system from north to south. On a personal point, I want to thank all of you for your service and the volunteer time you have provided the community with your public service. I know all too well how hard it is to sit behind that dais and make the decisions you have to make, and it's virtually impossible to make everyone happy. So thank you again, and I hope to continue working with each of you as a private citizen like I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Urilla, for those very kind words and for highlighting the need to continue achieving progress, especially, I can say this very selfishly, in my own backyard. And I thank you for your stewardship and for setting a fine example of how we can continue to contribute after our time here up on the dais is complete. Do we have any other comments?
Yes, sir. I have Keith Pierce, then Pete Quashis, and Newton Cook.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good morning. Keith Pierce, Pierce Ranch Incorporated in Okeechobee. I just want to thank the board for all your dedication to learn and try to understand a very complicated system. I live right in the middle of this system with ranch. I feel the board has done a very good job understanding and trying to balance all the different aspects between population, environment, water supply and everything else. And I just came to thank y'all for your dedication, and I hope that the future board will have the same dedication to understand and devote the time necessary and listen to the RAC committee, as they do a lot of research as well. And all of y'all are volunteers, and I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm Pete Quashis on behalf of Audubon of the Western Everglades, the other Audubon chapters of Southwest Florida, and a couple of other conservation groups with which I am associated, the Isaac Walton League of America and the Stuck Foundation, now called Angler Action. And Sam, we know where the sea trout are. We'd be glad to share the information. Matter of fact, there used to be sea trout on the grass beds in the Caloosahatchee, and I was looking forward today to celebrating on the way home of a major milestone in the recovery of our estuary, which was the awarding of the final contract for the C-43. There were other important issues also to be considered today. The last of the acquisitions in the Kissimmee Valley that would allow that project to come online. And importantly, additional funding to start some serious construction activity in the Central Everglades program as well. I regret the fact that that's not happening, but I certainly want to express my appreciation for the public service that you have provided and that your staff has provided, and we look forward to moving forward to continue the massive progress that you have been responsible for over the last few years. We have accomplished a lot. We are at the cusp of getting many of these projects operational so that we can start receiving the benefits, and I look forward to working with whomever comes along to try and make that happen. Thank you again for your service.
Thank you for your support and for sharing those observations.
After Newton, I have Captain Taryn Wadley and Becky Harris.
Mr. Cook, welcome, sir.
Thank you, folks, and welcome, sir. I will cover item number 24, which was the storage reservoir material hauling and stockpile. Thank you, the board and the staff, for getting the public on the FEB early. We've been on it a couple of years now, and with the change of hauling this rock, of course, we've had to close the FEB to public access, and that included the duck hunting and the fishing and the hiking and biking and birding and all the other activities that were going on out there. What I'm asking is, and this came from the discussion early on, is that when they build this road and make these arrangements to move this rock, that we do it in such a manner as we can reopen the FEB to public access. It's turned into a great bass fishery. There's absolutely no reason to keep it closed if a little workaround can be done. The biggest problem, I think, is perhaps the fact that we're dumping water across one of the levees with a pump, and we need to work that in a way so the access to the levee so people can drive around. So I would appreciate that. I can only tell you that staff has done wonderful work, and of course the governing board got us on with a vote a year early, and it's turned into a great recreation spot. 3 years ago, I stood here and I said, when you put the lake water through the SDAs, you're going to ruin your SDAs. Terry just got through telling you, when you make decisions on moving water on political pressure and public outcry, and not on good engineering and good science, you screw up things. I duck hunt in the SDAs. I've watched them go down every year. This year was the worst year. Ducks go where the habitat is good. Ducks go in working marshes that are cleaning the water. If you keep making decisions on moving water based on politics and public pressure and not on engineering, guess what? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cook.
Taryn Wadley, Becky Harris, then Nyla Pipes.
Welcome, Taryn.
Thank you. Hello, I'd like to leave with y'all here today my 23 years of my estimated catch reports from mostly Lake Hancock and a few other lakes, as well as detailed notes of events during times of harvest. Also, please remember in the 3 RAC meetings I mentioned, a 1 million pound fish kill in Lake Hancock in 1998. Also an 8-foot wide creek, fish kill in which the fish beach themselves to death going upstream, as they do. Along with 1972 records of FWC stating 152 pounds standing crop of tilapia, with other statements that unwanted fish are not FWC's target. Out of bodies of water 200 times smaller than Lake O. Sorry, I'm a little nervous. Also, my dad's notes, 85-year-old, wrote on these same issues over 10 years ago for a resolve, and notes of my catch report stating my small lakes are extremely underfished, with letters of FWC expecting me to clean up the water with my catches at my own expense. 10 years ago, even though biomass fish populations were identified in some of these lakes over 1,600 times smaller than Lake O. FWC still does not target underutilized biomass fish infestations, which have turned our lakes into fish sewage septic tanks, with the help of the water management districts feeding these infestations with human sewage and creating more habitat for these dominating schools of fish that no man catches nor has for nearly 87 years. I will be consistently attending these meetings to help show and prove that no one has the ability or skill to catch, including FWC, except for a very few dozen of nearly extinct commercial fishermen like myself, to prove these fish are the cause of your high TMDLs that are growing within the lakes. There are also even fewer processors than wholesalers in this state, which proves that with massive loss of our wild-caught fishery industry, that this industry's time to rise is now. But if not greatly nurtured by the FWC and Water Management District to create a bounty on these fish's heads by creating a subsidy and targeting biomass fish removal projects with the few fishers that are left, our lakes will die. That, with the waters held even lower than they were in 1932, I've also see overall size structure of all species of fish change many times due to catastrophic events. To target the outside of a lake and never consider the inside, with the proof of the biggest polluter of all that is growing within the lakes, taking water samples in the middle of these infestations and creating more water bodies without biomass fish removals, can never clean our freshwater systems. With my catches and everything I've already given and more, I can prove this. And if FWC does not target these fish, and they still don't, then I'm sure you can figure out who the most knowledgeable on these biomass fish infestations, which will blow your minds when my handcuffs are removed with no nets barred, for proof that biomass fish removal is the only real answer to greatly improve water quality, increase tens of thousands of independent jobs, which will stop and reverse all money spent on these systems and save taxpayers' dollars.
Hold on. Ma'am, thank you for providing that information on these biological stresses on the environment. I'm going to break the protocol here just briefly. Go ahead.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Real quick, Taryn, I just wanted to thank you. You've driven many hours to several RAC meetings, and then you were kind enough to come and sit with me for a couple of hours in my office, and we sat and talked. And all I wanted to say is thank you for your passion, your knowledge. This is a very bright lady, very smart lady, knows what she's talking about. I've asked our staff to get with her to talk about these issues. So I just want to thank you for what you presented. I now understand what you were trying to tell me for months, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate all that you're doing for us, Taryn. Thank you.
I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Our next speaker.
Becky Harris, then Nyla Pipes, and Jennifer Hecker.
Welcome back, Becky.
Hi, thank you. I think you all know I'm one of the dog owners in Stewart whose dog almost died. So I come back and give you guys additional information on what they found. And the report came back on Finn's brain. Finn is the dead dog, and he did have BMAA in his brain. That came from Brain Chemistry Labs. I do have that report for you. They also, I guess, sampled Lake O, Caloosahatchee, and the St. Lucie rivers, and they found BMA in those water bodies as well. They don't have that data, but as soon as they have it, I plan to return and give that to you guys. Now I'll start reading to keep myself focused. Anyway, we all know microcystin causes liver disease. I think I mentioned last time the Ohio State study that showed the cluster of non-alcoholic liver disease in the 4 counties around here: Martin, St. Lucie, Okeechobee, and Indian River. BMAA, we know, has been linked to ALS, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's. Dr. Larry Brand out of the University of Miami found BMAA in various aquatic food sources in the Caloosahatchee, the Biscayne, and the Florida Bay, and those were shrimp, crab, and fish. There are also other studies out there that are showing microcystin in our plant-based food. I have those studies as well as Dr. Brand's studies. It's obvious why I keep coming here. I mean, I saw what happened to my dog. I saw what happened to the other dogs. And I think it's a big wake-up call to all of us. There are tons of studies out there that are showing deaths from microcystins to humans. And I also want to point out that it's not just happening and it's not just a concern of the coastal communities. I think we are all in this together. That includes all of the people around the lake, all the people who get their water from this large body. So I think we should all be working together towards this. It's not one group against another. And as much as it might seem that I hate you guys, I really don't, and I appreciate your service, and I wish you all luck, and I look forward to working with the rest of the group that comes in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Becky, and thank you for appearing time and again to raise concern on this very real problem. Hi, Nyla, how you doing?
I'm good. Good morning, everyone. I feel like a lot of things have already been said, but I'm going to reiterate a few of them. First and foremost, service, public service, especially in a volunteer capacity, is some of the most beautiful work I think Americans can do, and I want to thank every single one of you for that work. I know that sometimes it can be very thankless, and there are a lot of long, hard hours put in that people don't realize. And as was said before, it's very difficult to meet all the needs of everyone all the time and make people happy. That leads me to the conversations around this problem, and Ms. Harris actually just said something really important. We are very much all in this together, and it greatly alarms me with the political rhetoric that goes on, where we have people claiming that one part of the system is the only part taking adversity. And when I walk into a meeting this morning here, and I have a well-known political activist gleefully bragging to staff that we don't have a quorum today, therefore I'm done, who did not even bother to stay to hear the updated conditions reports, we have a political problem in this. And I just encourage everyone in this room to please stop pitting each other against each other. Please stop stirring the pot when you don't need to. Please actually listen to what is said to you regarding the problems south or north of you or in your neighbors, communities across the state, because none of us are happy. Nobody loves what this flood control system has done to us. Nobody loves what, frankly, overpopulation of a state with a sensitive ecosystem has done. But I have watched for years people at the Corps, people at the district, good-hearted citizens show up and put in time trying to find a way forward. So I don't know the reason we did not have a quorum today. I know that transitions are difficult. I know that our governor is getting his feet under him regarding not just our water problems and our environment, but many other concerns of the state. I am looking forward to next month. I hope we have a quorum by then, because we have some important work to do. This work never stops, and the EAA reservoir, the C-43, the Kissimmee River Restoration Project, those things were all on the agenda today. So I do share that concern about being disappointed, but I am also hopeful for the future, and I just want to thank everybody, and I hope you all stay very involved. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your encouragement, and thank you for really focusing on the most important issues, which is solving these problems. And that's what should lead. Okay, who else do we have?
Okay, I have Jennifer Hecker, Gary Ritter, then Mark Perry.
Welcome, Jennifer.
Good morning. As I understand it, this is for all public comment, so I'm going to try to shove our comments into one comment. Basically, I represent the Charlotte Harbor National Estuary Program. We're a partnership of federal, state, and local governments, including 7 counties and 10-plus cities, that worked together to protect and restore waterways from Venice to Bonita Springs to Winter Haven, Florida. And I drove 6.5 hours to be here to give my quick comment here, to basically be here in personal support for you all to move forward with the C-43 construction. You know, our partnership, we have a collective plan that we put together, and the C-43 reservoir was identified in 2013 as one of our priorities. So we've been working on that, you know, promoting that ever since, and probably even before that time. This project is absolutely essential to restoring more natural freshwater flows to the Caloosahatchee River. I just wanted to point out that in June, the CHNEP, working with partners, we got volunteers out and we actually planted seagrasses in the tidal Caloosahatchee River in an area where they've been completely wiped out. We were pleasantly surprised that despite the toxic algae bloom, that they continue to survive, and they are actually flowering for the first time, being documented in that part of the river in over a decade. So it gives us a glimmer of hope that if we can restore more natural freshwater flows to that part of the river and estuary, that we can restore those seagrass beds that are the base of our food chains, our fisheries, and our quality of life in that area. So really urge you all to do whatever you can to get that contract. We really have to get that construction completed like yesterday. We've lost so much of the resource. It is questionable sometimes to us whether we can bring it fully back, but we believe we can if we act very, very quickly. The other comment I just wanted to give was just to ask for your support for a project that we're working very closely with Lee County, the Village of Estero, and the City of Bonita Springs. I'm sure you're aware that the City of Bonita Springs was severely flooded after Hurricane Irma just a little over a year ago. Severe hydrological alteration problems in that area that are affecting people. And we wanted to reach out and ask for your assistance. We came and brought a proposal for $250,000. Just to give you context, the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program, my sister program on the East Coast, gets about $500,000 a year in support from the governing board here, the South Florida Water Management District. We right now are not getting any. For the Charlotte Harbor National Estuary Program, which covers Southwest Florida. So we brought forward a proposal for $250,000 to advance this joint collective effort to get updated modeling for hydrological restoration in that region. We understood that there was only $50,000 available. We scoped that down with the partners, brought that back. Right now, we are ready to go. The team, the technical team is ready to go, but we have not yet received that $50,000 of funding that was verbally committed to us. So if you all would consider moving that forward for us, I know that the stakeholders in Southwest Florida would greatly appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning, Gary Ritter with the Florida Farm Bureau Federation. First and foremost, I want to thank this board, thank you all for the service on behalf of the Farm Bureau organization, the service that you have provided to South Florida and the 8.1 million people that live in this area. It is a tremendous balancing act. And I remember years ago when I was working at the district, we had another governing board member, Len Lendahl Sr., who always used to say, you know, our challenges are that we cannot all have the entire loaf of bread. And you know, when we're looking at flood protection, when we're looking at water supply, navigation, water quality, environmental enhancement, it is a tremendous balancing act that you all up on that dais are confronted with month after month working with staff. And, you know, I just think you all have done a great job in your efforts. And, you know, I think I don't have enough time to actually go through all the accomplishments that you have done working with staff here over the time period that you all have been on the board. We appreciate and we hope that the partnerships with agriculture will continue, because agriculture has made great strides. We've done a lot with water quality improvement down south of the lake, and we're working north of the lake, and we hope the new board will work with us as diligently as you all have. And again, you know, I want to thank you all for your service, and we really enjoyed working with y'all. Thanks.
Thank you.
After Mark Perry, I'll have Mike Collins and Celeste Palma.
Mr. Perry, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I also thank the governing board for your service. It is a public service, and since 1978, and I've seen quite a few governing boards come and go, and you know, this is quite a chore to kind of sit up here and manage quite a system that has developed over the years, and it's not an easy chore. But we look forward to working with the governing board coming forward and continuing the projects. There were several on the agenda today that need to continue to move forward, and it sounds like Governor DeSantis wants to continue those progress and ask and request for full funding and trying to get state and federal funding matched to continue forward. You know, there are spotted sea trout also in the St. Lucie Estuary, and if you want to come up there and show you, I've spent many nights out there with Dr. Grant Gilmore listening for those spawning aggregations, and it's quite incredible when you see over 50 decibels of noise and they're attracting females from over 3 miles away. And when they spawn and those eggs are fertilized in that water column, we're very concerned that we don't get a big freshwater flush to kind of dump out and wipe out a population of those. So just like south in the Florida Bay area, we're concerned about those conditions in the estuary because that particular animal spends its entire life cycle in the estuary environment. As far as the STA performance, I just wanted to mention that, you know, Terry did a great job and always does in presenting the data. And back in 2015, she presented a 5-year average of the data that showed the STAs had the best performance ever that year when about 525,000 acre-feet from the lake came through, which was the largest inflow from the lake, and remaining 750,000 or so came from the EA basin runoff. This year, as you saw so far in water year, about over 1 million acre-feet has come from the basin runoff of the EAA and over 300,000 from the lake. But the STA performance back then was incredibly good, down to 17 parts per billion in outflow. And I just want to remind you, it's not necessarily what's going on in that volume, it's how that STAs are used and utilized. I understand, I know the restoration strategy are going to expand the STAs, probably about 6,500 acres of new STAs. And so we're looking forward to kind of expanding that capacity in order to take more water, not only from, you know, the lake so we can have more water moving south, but with the storage reservoir project coming into place, that will help as well to store and treat and move that water south instead of the release of the estuaries. Lastly, on the performance of the lake, and we're participating in the LOSUM meetings and looking forward to the core. I'm, you know, still to be convinced that any kind of changing in the regulation schedule of downward trends or upward trends and where to put that level down is going to really, what that's going to do to significantly reduce or eliminate those discharges or releases to the estuaries. So taking it down to below the 12.5 or 12 feet or up to higher than 17 or 18 feet, that operational flexibility is really what's built into the operational plan. And I'm encouraged the fact that it's not just the LACO and the EAA water control plan, but it's going to encompass the greater Everglades ecosystem from the Kissimmee to Florida Bay. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that valuable insight, Mark. Appreciate it. Mr. Collins.
Mr. Chairman, what's left of the governing board, good morning. Good to see you. Appreciate the opportunity. You know, I thought about 100 different things to say coming up here, you know, but I don't have time for that, and probably most of it's already been said. I want to thank you for your service. I've been through 7 different transitions, governing board transitions with governors. I ran one of them myself, the biggest one when we switched from Democrat to Republican. Had lunch with Jeb Bush a couple of weeks ago, and he was kind of asking me, do we do this? Do we do, you know, sometimes, you know, even the people involved forget what's entailed. But I would point out that the law that created this district
contemplated a certain kind of transition. It's in statute. And it basically said that the governor incoming would take control of the board a year after he was elected. And the reason for that was to ensure continuity, was to ensure that there was somebody left to educate the incoming board members, that they not be hit with the tremendous responsibilities that you guys bear to balance massively important competing interests, you know, all over the place. It's balanced on a razor's edge. It always has been. Probably always will be, you know. And we're entering a brave new world. Well, that's not the case, with consequences that we really don't know. I think it depends to a large degree whether or not the people appointed to the board have any background knowledge. I had a whole bunch when I got here, and I still knew nothing, you know. So we don't know. And there's an assumption out there, the inevitability of all of us getting along and Everglades restoration moving forward, because that's what people have seen. First 17 years I talked to this district, there was no consensus or support for an Everglades restoration. It wasn't until we sat down at the same table, all of us, and worked out a deal during the Governor's Commission that became SERP. That's a very delicate sort of balance. I mean, there are a lot of people out there with competing interests now that I don't see getting any press coverage because they don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars getting dumped into PR campaigns for them. But I think we all need to understand, be careful what you ask for. And there are balances that could be upset. I'm going to have to repeat this again next month. I hope some of the people that are going to be on the board are listening and thinking about this. But again, I want to thank you guys for the tremendous dedication and the time you guys have put in on this, for keeping it moving forward, because I don't think any of that's inevitable. And there are consequences that could definitely get this jammed up at total gridlock very rapidly if people don't heed the need to keep those interests balanced. Again, thank you guys.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for sharing your experience. Welcome, Celeste.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Governing Board. Celeste Palma with Audubon, Florida. I just wanted to take a moment and thank you for your services to this board. And I wanted to take an opportunity to recognize you, Mr. Chairman, because you and I have worked closely together even before you were the chair. And I just want to thank you because you've actually worked to give more transparency to the district and provide more opportunity for the public to talk to the board, and that's something that has not been lost to Audubon. So we wanted to thank you for that opportunity, and just want to reiterate our support of continuing to work with the district moving forward and hoping that the next person that comes along continues to move us into the light. I was looking forward to support the items on the agenda today. They were all really good, but that's not to say that's not going to happen next month. But I did want to take the opportunity to thank you for everything that you've done. Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you for those very kind words, Celeste, and it has been a pleasure to work with you as well. I look forward to doing so in the future. Okay. Right. Well, I'd like to thank the members of the public that have taken the opportunity to share their very valuable perspective, I'd like to thank for their words of support and for pointing out details of the work yet to be done and for making that a matter of public record. That's critically important. And I'm sure our future board members will look back on what has been shared today as a very important basis, a platform, a starting point, if you would, for their involvement. I'd like to now open up to my fellow board members an opportunity to provide their board comment, their general comment. Ms. Moran, I can start with, okay. Sam, go ahead.
Mike Collins, if I'm not reappointed, check out Benny Blanco. He seems like a very smart young man.
I absolutely concur.
Check him out. He's in the Keys. He's a fisherman.
Totally agree. Sir.
I just wanted to reach out first to the young lady who's here several times and give her my condolences on the loss of her pet, and give my frustration as to the potential remedies for this toxic algae releases that are so, that are so devastating. remind everybody within the sound of my voice that these huge projects, these multi-billion-dollar projects that are planned to try and cure specifically the situation with the toxic algae aren't made by this board. We don't have access to that kind of money. Our budget last year was about $800 million, and it's all spoken for on these projects. We had about $5 million at our discretion last year. So, you know, we don't make these huge decisions, these 50-50 cost share decisions. They're made by Washington and by our politicians in Tallahassee. Because if they'd asked me, and I had an experience like this young lady had with the loss of her pets, I'd be recommending a reservoir and STAs north of the lake. That's where the pollutants are coming from. That's where the nitrogen and the phosphorus are coming from into the lake. You'd think you'd want to clean it up before it got into the lake instead of approaching $2 billion building the reservoir and an STA south of the lake. I mean, I'm not a hydrologist, I'm not an engineer, but doesn't that kind of make common sense? But they didn't ask me. For the record, they didn't ask us. So I just wanted to again, offer my condolences to her and explain that even though we appreciate her comments and appreciate her coming here, she's preaching to the choir. You know, it's your politicians in Tallahassee and your politicians in Washington that are making these huge decisions. And in response to one of the other speakers, Gary, you're right. Under the last 8 or 10 years, this board has made some considerable has finished a lot of projects, and not the least of which is the Lakeside STA, which is completed, the C-44 Reservoir and Stormwater Treatment Area, which is under construction, the 10 Mile Creek Water Preserve Area, which is completed, where we stepped in and bailed out our friends at the Corps, the Lake Hipkachee, you know the one. Hydraulic enhancement, the first phase is completed and the second phase is planned. Working on the planning. The C-43 water quality treatment and testing facility is completed. The C-43, the Caloosahatchee West Basin Storage Reservoir, which is under construction and which we had intended to devote $524 million toward today, but because we didn't have a quorum, we couldn't do it, so that's another delay. I just hope that the new administration's inability to get either one of their new appointees seated today isn't an indication of how they're going to run this district going forward. Let's hope it's not. We've also completed the Southern Corkscrew Regional Ecosystem Watershed, the Picayune Strand Restoration Project, which is under construction, the Florida Bay Restoration Initiative, which is completed, the C-111 Spreader Canal Western Project, which is completed, the C-111 South Dade Project, which is completed, the Biscayne Bay Coastal Wetland, which is under construction, the A1 Flow Equalization Basin, which is completed, the SDA-1 West Expansion Phase 1 is completed, one of my favorite projects, the Bulls Canal Conveyance Improvement, which is under construction, which is the only east-west conveyance in the EAA, and which is a great example of getting things done at the local level. This is not a 50-50 cost share. We're doing it all ourselves, and it's my understanding, Mr. Mitnick, that project is still coming in ahead of schedule and under budget. In addition to that, the L8 Flow Equalization Basin we've completed. The Lanehart and Masson Dam restoration on Loxahatchee River is completed. East Coast Protection Levee upgrade is completed. The Central Everglades Planning Project, some components like the EAA reservoir are authorized and in planning. Got delayed today because we didn't have a quorum. Some components like the 333 North are under construction. The G103 Weir water control structure replacement is completed. The invasive plant research lab in partnership with the USDA is completed. And the Kissimmee River restoration, which South Florida Water Management District acquired the land and the Corps is performing the construction, is under construction. So, I mean, those are some of the major things that we've accomplished or have been involved in, and I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention. It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of sophisticated work with a lot of cooks in the kitchen, but I think our staff and our executive director have done a great job during the 8 years I've been on this board, and I want to reserve some more time for comment, but I just wanted to make those points.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Tucker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. I'd like to begin by framing what I'm about to discuss, and I would reference the October 11th governing board meeting that we had when Congressman Mast was here discussing lowering Lake Okeechobee. And there was a conversation about 12.5 to 15.5, and there's a conversation about 10.5 to 17.5 in the operational flexibility that you get. But I was very clear from the dais in that October 11th meeting, had Ernie explained to him standing there, that what we are talking about here is not the operational flexibility from the 10.5, 17.5 that exists today. It is about the 12.5, 15.5 target levels that we're talking about that's currently under LORS and that now is being discussed under LOSUM. It feels like to me people are trying to hedge around that like, well, we already have this 10.5, 17.5. No, I want to be very specific in framing what I'm about to talk about. I'm talking about 12.5 to 15.5 and changing that part of the schedule. So I want to frame it to that. Lowering the lake to 10.5 feet, in my opinion, is asinine. Now let me provide to you the definition of the word asinine from the dictionary. Extremely stupid or foolish. That's not my words, that's the dictionary. Congressman Brian Mast, who is the leader of the Lake Okeechobee Lowering the Lake movement, I call it, and is the chairman of the governor's transition team on agriculture and the environment, has lived in the Treasure Coast region for 2 years. He has lived in South Florida for 4 years, with no background or history with the Everglades, Lake Okeechobee, agriculture, or agencies involved with the Everglades and Lake O issues. I asked myself what makes him qualified to advise our governor on such important issues on behalf of agricultural and environmental interests in South Florida. In my opinion, this man has a complete disregard for the truth about Lake Okeechobee and the communities that it sustains, which is all of South Florida, all. Not just Okeechobee, Indiantown, Port Mayaca, Canal Point, Pahokee, Belglade, South Bay, Clewiston, Moorhaven, Lakeport, and Buckhead Ridge. This is not the Congressional District 18 Water Management District. This is the South Florida Water Management District. So why would I make such a claim? Well, I want to share a story with all of you here today that has caused me a lot of sleepless nights since last summer. It all started July 25th of 2018 at the South Florida Ecosystem Restoration Task Force meeting that Mr. Marks and I attended. I serve on that committee as the chairman of our RAC committee. And while Congressman Mast appeared at that meeting and was grilling Mr. Marks about what are the permitted levels that we have to send water to permitted users, that was the conversation. The conversation was not what was Mr. Marks' opinion about how low the lake should go. Let's clarify that as well. You can watch this, it's recorded, it's on the website. Go back and check it out. So I'm thinking to myself as I'm listening to this conversation, I didn't engage in it, I listened. A wise man once said that intent comes prior to content. It's not what so much a man says, it's why is he saying it? So I'm thinking to myself, where's he going with this? Why does it matter so much how much water is kept on the lake for agriculture? Is he familiar with the savings clause from WRDA 2000 and SERP? Are we now trying to take out farming by taking away their water entitlements? I'm concerned at this point as I'm hearing this, and I want to reach out and help. I and all of my family and all of the people that I know, I have told that to vote for this man twice, and I have personally voted for this man twice. I want him to succeed and not continue down this line of thinking. So then I had the opportunity on the 7th of August, 2018, before about 300 people in Martin County at the Realtors Association of Martin County Forum on Water, sitting next to then Senate President Joe Negron, now Senator Gail Harrell, Marilyn Magar, lobbyists from the Florida Realtors Association, and Congressman Mast, had a conversation about lowering the lake. This was introduced in that conversation. And in that conversation, after he talked about lowering the lake, I said, you know, we need to, as I've said many times from the dais here, we need to look at the science. We need to listen to the experts, and we need to determine, you know, what is the right thing to do for the lake. I can't certainly come out and support some level because I don't have that knowledge. I'm not a scientist, but I need to learn from those people that do. After I said that, his quote was, quote, "Why do I care about the ecology of a lake that is 90% covered in algal blooms?" That was very concerning to me. I grew up in Okeechobee County. I grew up fishing Lake Okeechobee. I've lived for the last 23 years in Martin County. So why should we care about Lake Okeechobee? Lake Okeechobee is the liquid heart of the Everglades ecosystem. Healthy heart, healthy body. You kill the lake, kill the estuaries. All of South Florida depends on Lake O for water supply, flow to prevent saltwater intrusion, flow to sustain our STAs, you've heard us talk about that earlier, and more. The health of Lake Okeechobee is critical for Everglades restoration. The coup d'etat of this Water Management District Board was planned long before the November 7th meeting in Coral Gables. How do I know this? Well, let me share with you a conversation that I had on the 24th of August, 2018. After that Realtors Association meeting, I invited the Congressman and his Deputy Chief of Staff, Mr. Stephen Layton, to a lunch meeting at Osceola Street Cafe in downtown Stuart. It was just the three of us. I sat down and explained that I want to be a friend, I want to help, I want to share with him some thoughts, some things that we can have discourse privately but not publicly, and try to help him, guide him through this process to make good decisions for our system, for our estuary, for our lake. As I tried to explain in reference to Dr. Paul Gray's April 2017 report on lake level management, other issues that I wanted to bring before him, I was cut off 3 times saying, I don't want to hear that blank. Okay. Then the next quote that I hear in this conversation is I don't care if that lake is bone dry. Stop in my pool. Quote, when Ron gets elected, there will not be anyone connected to agriculture in any way on the board of the South Florida Water Management District. All board members will be from Martin in Lee County. So I'm thinking to myself, why does he feel this way? Well, this is my opinion. I believe it's because this board listened to the science presented by the experts and supported solutions that would actually accomplish Everglades restoration and provide interim relief from harmful freshwater Lake O discharges to the estuaries that did not require taking any more private property off the tax rolls and in devastating local economies. We simply followed the core mission of the agency, flood control for all the residents in the constituents of the 16 counties. And that made us the enemy to those who believe simply more land will solve the problem. Solutions not involving a land grab are no solutions at all, and this is the core root of the problem. The asking for our resignations had nothing to do with any vote taken at the November 7th meeting, in my opinion. If it were simply about those decisions, then why was our former chairman, Mr. Dan O'Keefe, asked to resign as he defended waiting to speak with the governor regarding the consent decree, and he abstained from the vote on the lease extension with no comment at all? I believe we're escalating a decade-old water war between coastal residents and residents of the heartland of South Florida, and that will get us nowhere in the pursuit of Everglades restoration. Misleading people to believe that Lake Okeechobee is dead and no longer important shows an enormous amount of reckless ignorance by anyone who makes such a claim as it pertains to the importance of a healthy heart in the greater body of the Everglades. Lake Okeechobee is the liquid heart of the Everglades, and her health and vitality is the key to the health of the Everglades and our estuaries. The lies about Lake Okeechobee must stop now. I referenced the February 6, 2019 article in the Lake Okeechobee News. Headline, Mass blames lake for toxins in coastal waters. Congressman Mass press release claims, quote, last summer the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers discharged water from Lake Okeechobee that was found to be more than 50 times too toxic for human contact. Florida Department of Environmental Regulation tests do not back up this claim. None of the lake samples tested at 50 times the WHO limit. FDEP reports showed the toxin levels in Lake Okeechobee were low all summer, Most tests on water in Lake Okeechobee tested showed no toxins or levels that were barely detectable and well below the 10 micrograms per liter level deemed safe for recreational contact by the World Health Organization. The Okeechobee Utility Authority that my office building is connected to and gets water from uses Lake Okeechobee as the primary drinking water source for its public drinking water system. OUA tests did not detect toxins in the lake water, nor have I heard of anyone in that community going to the hospital because they were sick. I've had the unique privilege of being both a Heartland and a coastal resident of South Florida for nearly 44 years. I commute regularly back and forth from the upper Kissimmee Basin to the St. Lucie River day after day, and know many people from both areas who care deeply about fixing our water issues. We must work together in a selfless, not selfish, in a selfless manner to bring all sides of the issue to the table and execute a plan that benefits every resident of South Florida, every resident. The shared prosperity of the world's second largest and most successful flood control system also bears the shared adversity of the environmental consequences of said flood control brought about by the actions of our forefathers decades ago. This is unavoidable, and no one person or group of people should bear the blame. We are all to blame if we live, work, and play in South Florida. We are all polluters in some form. We must do our part to correct the problem. From septic tanks to real estate development, agriculture, we must all join together, bear responsibility, and move forward. Let us please listen to the science, glean wisdom from multi-generational residents from all 16 counties, apply common sense, and remove all preconceived notions and ideologies that cloud our thinking. Question everything, no matter the source. Question the intent more than the content. And let's just use some good old common sense. Keep the politics, the politicians, and the paid special interest groups out. Then, and only then, will we succeed.
Brendan, thank you for your very genuine expression of not just frustrations, but opportunity. I've had the pleasure of serving alongside you and my fellow board members, and I consider that to be amongst the highest honors that I've enjoyed. I'm going to reserve my comments, as Ms. Moran has, for a little later in the meeting. Sam, would you like to go? Yes, please. By all means.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Tucker, and thank you, Mr. Curcio. Yeah, I just am so impressed with Mr. Tucker's concise ability to analyze the situation we're in here and articulate it so well. What a great loss to this district, losing you on this board, Mr. Tucker. It's a sin. I want to thank Governor Scott, now Senator Scott, for having appointed me twice to this board and for having the confidence in me to make the right decisions as I see them, to be in the best interest of the environment and the district and our stakeholders, and that takes some balancing, and you can't please all the people all the time. The whole idea of Florida Statute 373 and how this board is appointed and how they get confirmed by the Senate was designed to protect this board from political influence. Hello, we're supposed to be beyond what the politicians in Tallahassee or the politicians in Washington think. We have a fiduciary duty here. We all sworn to honor the Constitution, and we have a fiduciary duty to our stakeholders, to the environment, and to this district to do the right thing. And in my heart, I know I've done the right thing with every vote and decision I've made, and working closely with my fellow board members, I know they have too. So this whole situation with asking for the for the unanimous, complete resignation of our board members is beyond the pale. But anyway, back to Senator Scott. Thank you for your confidence in me and my fellow board members, and best of luck to you on your election to the Senate. And we'll be watching your career carefully and look forward to your political future. A couple of other things I want to hit on in my last board comment here. You know, one of the things I've been concerned with over the years is the incredible oversight that this board gets from Tallahassee through DEP. You know, they micromanage everything we do, from major decisions we make through our budget. They want a weekly phone conference to go over our spending and our budget and our how we spend our money and what we're doing. I mean, if that's the case, if the administration wants that kind of oversight from DEP, what do they need a board for? Have the legislature change the law and run the district from Tallahassee. They try to do that now, and it's a constant battle to try and retain some kind of sovereignty for our board here. They even want to dictate how we spend our ad valorem real estate dollars. Well, I've objected to this before, because under Article 7(1)(a) of the Florida Constitution, the legislature nor the executive branch have the authority to levy an ad valorem tax. I guess that's the one reason that they need this board, is only the board can levy that ad valorem tax on the real estate we all own from Orlando to Key West. My question is, if they don't have the authority under the Constitution to levy an ad valorem tax, how the heck is it that they get to tell us how to spend every penny, right down to who gets raises and who doesn't? It's beyond the pale, and it's wrong, and I hope that the new administration and the new board takes that under consideration and considers getting it fixed. One of my other long-time concerns while I've been here is our O&M capital improvement budget. We are, by tiny incremental steps, improving that, but as was reflected in the audit that our Inspector General did last year, we're about $35 million a year behind in what we should be spending on our infrastructure and our capital improvement to protect this 70-year-old system. I recommend to the incoming administration and the new board that they look hard at their O&M capital improvement budget and see if some improvements can't be made there to protect the system before we get a couple of back-to-back wet events and have a disaster. You know, with all the political rhetoric and environmental concerns, which are, the environmental concerns are legitimate, but first and foremost, we're supposed to be a flood control district. That's a lot of times I think we lose the focus on that. Let me talk for a minute about this SB 10 reservoir. You know, as I expressed earlier, if you want to get the algae out of Lake Okeechobee, you should probably be building it north of the lake. But it's not being built north of the lake. It's being built south of the lake. I wonder why that is. You know, in addition, it's another multi-billion-dollar 50-50 cost share with our federal partners, Washington politicians and the Corps. In the last 18 years, since Congress passed SERP, none of the projects that they envisioned have been completed. We're spending billions and billions of dollars, but the projects are so big, and you've got the bureaucracy of Washington and the Corps, that nothing ever gets completed. I mean, now to be on the threshold of entering another huge project with them doesn't make sense to me. I'd rather build smaller projects on our own, and at least we can get them done, than build huge projects which never get done. But you know what? They didn't ask me. You know, and I've said this before, people may get tired of hearing it. Albert Einstein's definition of insanity was keep making the same mistakes over and over again and expecting different results. I mean, to think that this SB10 reservoir and STA are going to be done within a few years is a fantasy, and it's because of the money. You know, the state was supposed to allocate their $800 million from Amendment 1 money, but the courts have now ruled that they can't use Amendment 1 money because the way the Amendment 1 language was drafted and passed into law, they can only use that money to improve lands that they acquire with that money. So the reservoir property was acquired years ago, and they're saying that you can't use the Amendment 1 money for our half, for the state's half of the SB10 reservoir. That decision's on appeal, but I've read that. I've read the Amendment 1 language, and I happen to agree with the courts. I think the Amendment 1 money or Amendment 1 language was improperly drafted, but they didn't ask me. And the other half of the money is supposed to come from the feds. Well, the feds are behind in their 50-50 cost share with the rest of the SERP projects, anywhere from 1.2 to as much as $3 billion, depending on how you calculate it. So if they're that far behind with the rest of the major projects, what makes us think that they're going to be able to come up with the money to build their half of the reservoir, even if they agree to do it, which they haven't yet? I mean, it's mind-boggling. The other concern I've had for a number of years at this district is the compensation and the benefits for our employees. In my honest opinion, we have some of the best folks in the world working here. You know, I didn't know it or realize it when I came on board, but we really do have a world-class staff, and that goes right from the executive staff down to the blue shirts or out in the field. They all do their job not for the paycheck, but because, believe me, it's not where it should be, but because they love the district, they love the mission, they love the environment. I've said many times that their pay scale has been woefully ignored, and that last time I did a study 2 years ago, they were about 15% behind the rate of inflation over the last 10 years. And I would ask the incoming administration and the incoming board to look real hard at the compensation packages for our employees and see if we can do the right thing by them. Finally, I want to mention why I think there's all this argument between the parties, between the environmental communities and agriculture over what we should do and where we should go. When I first came on this board 8 years ago, I was told by some people that there's a secret agenda of the environmental community and the foundation, and that what they really want to do is destroy the ag business in the EAA and return to something they call Plan 6, where the state could acquire all of that land, not just part of it, but all of it, and return it to the river of grass. Well, I mean, that sounds good at first blush, except for all the people who live there and own property there and work in the glades and have all their families dependent on all those jobs, and the food that we get from the row crops and all the other farmers. I'm not just talking about the big boys. There are 45 or 50 small family farm operations out there that need to be protected as well. And that, in my opinion, is the reason why the foundation is pressing over this lease deal, even though they were in the room in Tallahassee when the terms of the law were negotiated, and they knew the farmers, as part of their consideration for agreeing to all this, was that they could extend, we're required by law to extend that lease until such time as we're ready to get out there with, with bulldozers, which would be after the planning and after the design phases. Yet, even though they agreed to that when the terms of the law were drafted, when we voted to extend the lease, they got their hair on fire like we committed a felony when they had agreed to the terms of it when it was passed by the legislature. It's duplicitous. So what you're going to hear here as the new board comes in is buy the land. Buy the land. Move the water south. Buy the land. And they don't mean buy the land east or west where we need it as well. And they don't mean buy the land north. They mean buy the land in the EAA, one bite at a time, however they can, to destroy the agricultural business in the EAA. You take big hunks, 16,000 acres and other big hunks out of farming operations. Farmers operate on a scale. And when you reduce the scale, you reduce their profit, and you reduce their ability to stay in business. And it's not talked about, but I'm talking about it because I was told this 8 years ago when I came on the board, and I didn't believe it. Well, after 8 years of almost daily involvement with these topics, I believe it now. I believe that the real goal of the Foundation and their minions is to destroy the agricultural business in the AAA, and I think it's wrong. I think it doesn't serve the environment. It doesn't serve the ecology, and it's not the right thing to do. And I just hope that this new administration coming in, from the governor on down to the new board, doesn't let the foundation use them as tools to accomplish that end. But you'll know I'm right if 3 months from now, 6 months from now, you start to hear that drumbeat from this board and this new administration. Buy the land, move the water south. Buy the land, move the water. If you hear that, then you'll know that Jim Moran was right and something needs to be done, because if that happens, you think Florida Crystals and U.S. Sugar are going to just give up and walk away? Hell no, they're not. They got lawyers and lobbyists. We're going to end up in litigation from now until God knows when, and it's going to impede the work that we're supposed to be doing. That's all I have to say, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you for noting that you have been giving of your time for 8 years. That's quite an impressive feat, and I want to personally thank you for that commitment and for having really left it all on the field, so to speak, and for always having the well-being of all of the 8 million plus folks that live in their 16 counties top of mind. Mr. Curcio, do you have any other comments at this point in time?
I think it's been eloquently displayed here with these two gentlemen, and I don't see how I can offer anything. You have covered it all. And to staff, again, if I'm not reappointed, I enjoyed my learning curve. Like the young lady said earlier, she doesn't hate us. In years past, I've hated this board for 20 years until you guys stuck a fire hose in my mouth and fed me with information because I was ignorant, as a small group of people are. They're ignorant to the real show that's going on. And I was educated, and I'm still getting educated daily, and y'all need to still answer your phones at 4:30 a.m., please, if I'm not reappointed. But thank you, and board, anybody else listening that was on this board that I served with. It was a pleasure, believe it or not. Long hours, a lot of information, but I'm not going to stop here because I'm 55. Been living in Homestead 55 years and 8 months. I'm fighting for my grandkids now. And not to farm, to live in Florida, fish in Florida, drink the water. And all those nasty emails, like I said, it was a small group of people, vile people. I deleted them. So I'm fighting with most of you in this room, most of you listening, and those kids. Because, you know, I think I'm over the hill. I think I'm past middle age, so we got to concentrate on the young people and our environment. We have to have food. We have to balance it. Thank you.
Okay.
Is Mr. Curcio making a campaign announcement? You getting ready to run for something? That sounded pretty good to me.
As soon as I sell my property down there, which when this occurs, it's not going to be another farmer buying it, by the way. It's going to be full of septic tanks, I'm sure, unfortunately, because my father in 1948 did not envision me taking over the farm and my sisters and then selling our property someday to pay fertilizer bills and seed bills. He envisioned generations of agriculture, but I think we all see the handwriting on the wall that we're all satisfied with eating food from third world countries, and that's what's happening. I could go on and on about that. Right now, Mexico is flooding our country with open price zucchini and yellow squash. I have 15,000 in my coolers just from this week alone. Consumers will not buy as long as they can get the produce free. And, but we can talk about that forever. But God bless you all, and this executive staff and the staff all the way down to my field station in Homestead, God bless you for the years of dedication that I hated you, that you were providing me such a service. And social media last night, everybody remember Scott Thorpe? He basically told me, he said, "How do you like me now, Sam?" you know the song, "How do you like me now?" You know, do you miss me? And I do. I do miss quick action, but those days are gone. Now we have to go through days of action to get some quick relief and then close everything back up. But thank you.
Thank you, Sam. I'm going to move forward to staff reports, and I'm going to reserve my comments for when we wrap those up. So I'd like to begin with inviting Candida up to give the monthly financial report, which, as Carlin had mentioned, I believe is required by law to be provided.
Mr. Chairman, the monthly financial report is through the month of December in your packages. Staff foresees no issues. All indications are that we're ahead of trend, expenditures and revenues, and we will post the report for the public on our website after this meeting.
Thank you very much. Our general counsel's report. Carlin, do we have anything to report?
No report, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Marks, our executive director's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, board members. If you'll indulge me for a minute, I got really small writing here, so I got to put the glasses on and hope I can follow. I'd like to start by thanking all the board members I've served for your direction and thoughtful consideration of the items we've tackled since I was asked to lead your team of approximately 1,400 dedicated staff members. It's been an honor and a privilege to serve alongside them and you during that time, and they will remain a highlight of my public career for sure. But Mr. Moran, you forgot a few things, so I'm going to add them to the list if you don't mind. So for years, items here seemed to volley about in some sort of policy limbo, and we were able to bring those items to resolution. The issue of invasive plants that have plagued the refuge for over a decade now have the direction and true partnership necessary to ensure the refuge stays a jewel in our nation's Everglades. And in the process, we leveraged our efforts to create expanded uses in the refuge for all Floridians to enjoy. A land swap, outstanding since 2012, was completed to further address the water quality commitment the board made with regard to the Everglades as part of a long overdue acquisition of the snail farm. This district was tested under Hurricane Irma, and we were able to protect the millions of residents of South Florida from catastrophic flooding events due to our world-class team and the district's massive flood control system. In an effort to ensure the district has the ability to communicate effectively, track system-wide issues, and be better prepared during these events, the Emergency Operations Center was upgraded with the latest technology, ensuring effective and efficient execution and communications to protect the people of South Florida in times of crisis. We set the bar with the district's Python elimination program, the most successful program to date in addressing the issue, and in hopes of ensuring the billions of taxpayer dollars we are spending on restoration leave some wildlife to protect. Now partnered with FWC, it can only build upon this success. The district has taken real steps, not just talked about moving water south, but real steps with the construction of the S333 North structure. The district moved SEP from planning to reality. We provided much-needed resources and tools to our staff to ensure that they have what they need to do the job, a job that will only get tougher as we take on new works that this district has underway. We acquired, with the district leadership of the Army Corps of Engineers, a permit stranded in perdition since 2011 to install pumps at the southern end of Lake Okeechobee to ensure that South Floridians can receive the water when needed. These include the tribe, the STAs, agriculture, and coastal drinking water wells vulnerable to saltwater intrusion that provide water for urban users via their municipalities and utilities. Our field crews, as you had mentioned, stepped in and aided the Corps of Engineers in finishing the C-111 components in order to finally raise levels in the L-29, move additional water to Everglades National Park, and meet their timelines. We restored surface water inflows to Taylor Slough, cut off from years of system modifications, which is showing an immense improvement in the flow of water to eastern Florida Bay. We developed an MOA with our West Coast constituents in Lee County to address natural system maintenance efforts that had been neglected, ensuring floodwaters in natural areas can move off the landscape unimpeded. We initiated a level of service study that will complement the work we are doing to address sea level rise and inform federal efforts in the Southeast Coastal Study, ensuring that the future success of any state and federal and local efforts. We completed the STA 1 West expansion, the first one, adding additional 4,700 acres of STA in our commitment to address water quality in the Everglades under restoration strategies, and we're working on the design for 2 more. And probably the most notable accomplishment is completing the 203 process for the Everglades Agricultural Area Project. Not only was it approved by the ASA, it was approved by Congress and signed by the President, the first of its kind since such a process was authorized in 1986. We set the bar for the nation. These are just a few of the major successes. As you mentioned, Mr. Moran, the district's done a lot more, but we're not done. I look forward to the state's efforts on the range of items identified in Governor DeSantis' order, including water quality and sea level rise. As someone who lives in the affected area, like all of us, the last several years should leave no doubt that these issues are felt no place more than right here in South Florida, where 1/3 of the population resides. Finally, on January 4th of 2019, I tendered my resignation to this board. I believe that I have left the staff in a position of continued success. My time has passed, and I wish my successors the best of luck. With that, my last official day will be March 5th. And in my absence, the delegation of authority allows Ms. Terry Bates to execute the powers of the ED. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marks. On a personal note, I have had so many opportunities to work very closely with you, both here and all over the state, and in Washington, D.C., with the focal point being the 203 process. And it has been a tremendous educational opportunity, which really highlights, the decades of experience that you have and have always been willing to share and have always used to accomplish the goals that this agency has. You've been kind enough to give us highlights of much of what has been accomplished, even as of late, as has been communicated, I will be tendering my resignation, which will become effective tomorrow, February 15th. We'll be providing our governor with written notification of that resignation. I am very emboldened by his commitment to tackling issues that this agency has successfully been addressing, even in spite of all of the limitations that we face. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that for a moment. It is and has become abundantly clear since I began serving on this board in 2016 that there are a great many well-meaning individuals who have taken it upon themselves to critique or analyze the work performed here that simply do not have a detailed and even remotely complete understanding of the limitations you face when you work here at this agency. Folks have touched upon the complexity of the issues. I think that's pretty obvious. I think we're dealing with trying to figure out how to coincide, and by that I mean, how do we get 8 million plus people to live and work in one of the most unique environmental settings in a manner that is symbiotic? How do we do that as quickly as possible while still being subject to so much limitation? Because so much of the work that is performed here is new. I mean, we were the first folks to get through 203 since, what, 1986? We're the gold standard. Our task was, in many circumstances, when it came to SB 10, considered to be untenable. But the amazing people that work here, going back to the Packer process, made it happen. That is not, and in my experience, has not been an anomaly. It has been the standard, which has definitely gone, in many instances, unappreciated. I chose to stay on board over the last several months in order to see this opportunity that we call transition present future board members and our stakeholders with an opportunity to build upon successes. There's clearly been a great deal of frustration shared by a wide variety of parties, but there have been so many important relationships that have been formed at a point in time in which there were very caustic assertions being made against people, not just on the board, but in the agency and related to the work that's performed here. I see out in front of me so many people from the NGO sector that I've had an absolute pleasure of working with. I see Celeste and Julie, and there's just a lot of folks here that I personally know understand that what leads the direction, or what should lead the direction of where we're working, is solving the problems for everybody. My most heartfelt recommendation to future board members is that they actively pursue two opportunities. One, take advantage of the asset that sits before you here. As has been said so many times, there are some stupendously talented individuals that have made so many sacrifices, financial and otherwise, to come and work here in an environment that is preposterously challenging. Learn from these folks. Be more enamored with the solution than you are with a theory. That is what our stakeholders deserve. Okay? And secondly, take the opportunity to engage as much as you can outside of your comfort zone. to head out, be in nature with all of our representatives of our stakeholders communities, and do that as often as possible. To make no mistake, this is a job that will require an extensive time commitment. You know, I mean, you hear our board members say it, and they mean it. You're spending 20, 30 plus hours a week to honor the role that you play here. But finally, looking forward, I know it's been said time and again that there has been so much delay and so much difficulty with getting our solutions up and running. As luck would have it, we're getting to a place where I would consider it to be a tipping point for good. We have so many grand opportunities through SERP and SEP, through local initiatives, through the P3s that we function in and throughout, to start to support the bold initiatives that have been, or continue supporting, as a matter of fact, the bold initiatives that have been identified by the governor, to build, not just analyze and talk about and argue about, but to build. Because, folks, that's ultimately the major component that's been missing. And we have that opportunity, and we can make it a reality if we actually decide to have discussions that are about solutions and not about personal differences or political differences. And it's going to take a very genuine effort on everyone's part. There are over 8 million people living in the 16 counties. Right? As Brandon said, we are the problem, but we are also the solution. My hopes are, going forward, that the distractions can be put aside and we can prove that to be the case, that we can prove to be the solution. I'm going to continue, as Irela had mentioned earlier, and there's so many folks here that have been on the board that have gone on to really make a difference. I'm going to continue to try to do that wherever the opportunity lies, and that's my commitment. So I want to thank you all for that. I want to thank staff again. It has been a pleasure to try to work so very hard to put you all in a position to win, and you have so many times. I want to thank all of our stakeholders, the representatives of the NGO communities that have always been here, that have taken weekly calls with me, that have been around and will continue to be around. That advocacy is so important. Let's give each other a chance. Let's recognize and value the efforts that take place in this building. And again, I see a very bright future for South Florida. So unless my fellow board members want to add something?
Well, I just want to say thank you to Ernie Marks and how sad I am on your announcement that you're leaving as ED. I completely understand it, but it's a great loss to this district. In working with you and working with probably half a dozen other either permanent or interim EDs over my 8 years, you certainly are eminently qualified with your experience throughout Florida and at this district. But more than that, you have the backing of your staff and the employees. They respect you, and that's how you get the most out of them. That's the kind of trust and admiration that you can only build over time. And no matter who they get in here to try and replace you, those are awfully big shoes to fill. And it's, you know, I'm speechless at the changes that are being made at this district, because I've come to really love the people who work here and love the mission, and to see it denigrated and trivialized this way is heartbreaking. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Curcio.
Real quick, I'll shift gears. I have a question on C-43. The embankment, the first part of that project next month when we sign it and go, how long does that have to sit and settle before we continue going up further? I know the pyramid's been there a while, they're settled. But the embankment when we push up the dirt,
You had referenced the pyramids, the mounds that were constructed earlier on. They were required to have a settlement of about 18 months. So as you go through the progression of building the embankment around the facility, there will also be a settlement period in similar length as to that 18 months.
so once we start pushing, once it's complete, then we have another 18 months of settle time.
No, it's not once it's complete. It's as you go along, you continue building, and then you wait for a settlement of each section. And there, once that section reaches its period, you can go back and top it off and finish it up as you're progressing around.
I had that note to ask you in my briefing and clean forgot about it. We started talking about squash. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Tucker?
Well, Mr. Marks got up and left the room, so he went on to C-43, but I would be remiss not to, my last comments on this board, and I noticed, Tia, thank you. I think I'm the only one with Kleenex. Tia knows I'm a crier, and I've done a pretty good job to this point, but seeing the emotion for Mr. Marks and he stepped out of the room, let me first say that, there he is, talking about you, Ernie. I remember the first meeting, I was appointed on a Monday in June, I believe it was my daughter's birthday, and I had to be briefed within 48 hours because we had a meeting that Thursday. And I remember coming and sitting down in that conference room, and I don't know if everybody in that room knew it, but I was a nervous wreck. I had no idea what was getting ready to get thrown at me, and I did my very best, as I think that I've been accused of, that I hide my nervousness well. But I was very nervous, and Ernie doesn't remember this because he would have no reason to, but I believe you were our Everglades policy chief at the time, and Pete Antonacci was sitting at the other head of the table running the meeting. You came in a tad bit late, I remember, and you sat behind me. I was sitting here, you kind of sat over here behind me in that very first meeting, and I don't even remember what Ernie was talking about, but Ernie started talking about something, and I immediately just noticed that you had something about you, sir, that you were a leader, that I needed to listen to you, and that was before I even knew that you were going to be considered for this position. And as Mr. Moran said, the greatest loss of all the losses that have been discussed here today is the loss of you, sir. I have the utmost respect for you. I know the people in this building do. You've done a tremendous job. You have tremendous knowledge. I hope that you find yourself in some position to continue to work towards accomplishing the goals of Everglades restoration and things here in South Florida, because you're a tremendous asset to all the people of South Florida. And the people in this building should be praised on the front page of every newspaper every time we get a big rain. We talk about first responders, and I respect our policemen and our firemen and those people that respond in tragedies, but if it were not for the work of the men and women from our field stations to our service centers to in this building every single day, that man a control room here 24/7 every single day, that when we get a big rain event, if they weren't doing their jobs, things that you can't even imagine. We lost an employee in my 20 months here that he was the diver, I believe, that we lost. People have sacrificed their lives in this process, that every time we get a big rain event, the reason that we can all live, work, and play and do our businesses, whatever they are, and it's because of the men and women of this agency. These are some of the finest people I've ever had the opportunity to work with. And I respect all of you more than you'll ever know. So it has been the complete privilege of my life at this point to serve the 20 months that I've had the opportunity to serve. So God bless each and every one of you. Mr. Marks, look forward to seeing you somewhere down the road, buddy, and I'm out.
All right. Well, I want to thank you all for your participation today and for your patience with this somewhat abbreviated agenda and with your ongoing participation. That's critical. I hope to see more of you in the future. I've got about 30 hours free now a week. Don't tell my wife and kids, but I do look forward to being on that side of the dais. And thank you for joining us. At this point in time, I would like to call to adjourn the meeting. So the meeting is adjourned.